I'm JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports. That is Greg Luca from the San Antonio Express News coming to you for the long awaited. Is it long awaited?
I was gonna say, are people dying for this
Yeah.
content?
Yes, semi long awaited UTSA football spring wrap up. Greg, a pretty interesting spring in that I don't know that there were a lot of huge storylines going on. The Roadrunners wrapped up their spring this past Saturday, a little bit later on the calendar than usual. What were some of your big takeaways from what you saw?
Well, yeah, to your point about the calendar, it's kind of interesting because without the spring game, which we can obviously talk about more in the decision why they didn't want to do that, it sort of changes the timeline of things. Like I have story I'll run tomorrow and I have stum I'll run the next few weeks because usually it felt like you wanted to have it done by the spring game, but now it's like, what's really the difference? You're just kind of writing about guys and things anyway. And I do feel like spring football is always kind of overrated. Like it's something
Yeah.
for us to do, but more often than not, whatever takeaway or whoever stands out, they end up not doing anything because like it just is sort of, I don't know, it's just sort of sometimes people look at it in practice and it doesn't translate to anything. And especially now with the NIL and the possibility of people moving, you just hear less and less reality than you've ever
Yep.
heard before in terms of what's going on there. So I think really the biggest overarching storyline was the talk about the discipline factor, which I
Bingo.
think is really
Yep.
interesting.
Yep.
Um, and everybody has said we don't see that part of it, but everybody has said that it's all kind of different and a little bit more buttoned up is the phrase that a lot of them used. Where just if somebody's late, they're running. Jeff told us a story the other day. If he got into the office early and took a stroll through the locker room, and the guys who had their shoes lined up wrong or whatever ended up having to run some extra after practice. So little stuff like that, I think, could potentially go a long way. I don't know. The big issues that this team needs to address last year, it was the discipline part with the penalties wise stood out. And Jeff he was a little bit hesitant to admit this at times last year, I think, but this spring he's said that there were times that it just didn't look like the most well-coached team on the field. And I think the fans certainly voiced their opinion that was something that led to some of the early struggles. And I think we talked about some signs of that we saw too. Not that they don't know what they're doing, but just there were some lapses there. And so maybe tightening everything up could be a potential boon for this fall. And we'll have to see if it starts or if it helps with starting fast, because that's been the talking point the last couple of years is how do they get their best player early in the season, which we haven't seen.
Yeah, that was practice number 14 of 15, where Jeff Traylor said he was looking at people's shoelaces and having them run. And he was half joking on it, but if you watch their end of their practices, these guys have, presumably drills and stuff, running lines for guys that are late. And we'll see how that translates, right? How it translates, because I think Jeff decided he wanted to be a little bit more hands-on. I think in the past he's kind of delegated some stuff to his staff, and we've seen mixed results, right? How do you think that plays out moving into the season? It's obviously something that I think they have off-season workouts twice a week in the summer that they're going to continue on throughout the off-season leading into camp.
Yeah, it was funny with him talking about being more hands-on with stuff. The notion that with the house settlement, we'll see where that ends up landing. But the idea that the schools can pay the athletes directly with the revenue sharing puts a little bit less burden on trying to get all the NIL fundraising, and he can do a little bit more of that hands-on coaching stuff, which is kind of a funny way to think about having those responsibilities restored a little bit. I'm sure he'll still be heavily involved in the fundraising side of it, but the idea that you can take more individual attention with every last guy on the roster is really pretty interesting. So I think there's obviously the potential for it to make a difference. You would think, if nothing else, that they would be able to carry over from the level that we saw towards the end of last year, where those things stopped being an issue as much, and it seemed like they were playing at a much higher level, especially on offense with so many guys back. Now, the defensive side, I guess, is going to be a question how much anything that happened last year carries over, just because it's going to be so many new faces in new spots. So that one is more of a question mark, but I would think offensively we'll see them be a lot more crisp just because they have that carryover and they've only tightened up since then, would be my thought.
Yeah, I think the term Jeff used was no longer needing to be the number one fundraiser so he could focus on other things. So we'll see how that turns out. Let's jump to the football side of things, Greg. I think we saw an offense that was pretty much intact. A couple of guys were sitting out as they rehabbed injuries from the end of last year. But for the most part, I would say the offensive line had a few new faces. As they typically usually do, they had some offensive linemen moving around, different jersey numbers, no jersey numbers, the same jersey number. So it's kind of hard to see who it was, but think there's a few newcomers along the offensive line that may have an impact at some point this season, but for the most part, if everybody's healthy, it's going to be a lot of the same guys we saw last year, right?
Well, I was going to say, especially on the offensive line, we saw some new guys, and I don't want to run afoul of the open practice procedures because we're probably not supposed to say who's not out there. But I think there are probably some guys that are safe to pencil in as starters who were not practicing either for parts of the spring or for all of the spring. So it looked like they were kind of rotating more guys or doing different things because they were, but I don't know how relevant it is going forward. I think you'll probably see, you got four returning starters from last year essentially, and I would think you would see those guys plugged in at the same spot, and then we'll just have to see what happens at center. But even that might be a familiar face too, with the potential for Ben Rios or Luke Lopez to step in there, which might have been the plan all along, depending sort of what you believe. So yeah, I think especially on offense, it's all going to be really similar to what we've seen before, and I think that there was probably a reason why, especially early on, it sounded like that group was ahead of the defense when they went
Yeah.
good on good, and then I think we got fewer answers about that as time went on. But I think at least early on we knew that the offense was a step ahead, which wouldn't have been a surprise to anybody.
Yeah, I think Owens probably looked as good as you would expect. He said he wanted to weigh a little bit more heavier in the coming season. He's working on that. Uh, you know, really tremendous upside from what I saw out of him. He looks like he's ready, and it's just a matter of protecting him, I think, at this point.
Yeah, well, and the other thing I didn't even realize this until I went to write the story. We talked about how long David Amador missed last year and how that
Right.
impacted the offense. But right when he came back was when Devin McEwen got injured too. So they only played together for 2 games, and those are probably your two. I don't know if it's fair to say best offensive weapons with what Robert Henry can do, but at least your two best receiving targets, you would think. I mean, Willie McCoy's obviously got some talent and the ability to make some downfield plays with his speed and some things he can do in that way. But I would think that McEwen and Amador would be considered the two most valuable pieces of the offense from that skill player perspective. So to me, the potential of what they can do with another year and actually being able to play together healthy for some time is pretty exciting. And yeah, you don't want to take Owen for granted. You talked about, I think he said, I wish I had looked it up before we did this, but I think he said he was like 10 pounds heavier
Right.
already, or at
Yeah.
least a few, and then
10
wanted to add
pounds.
more. So we'll see what, if you can accomplish that. First of all, it's not a given, but then also, um, how that translates because obviously he was pretty mobile and had some effectiveness that way. I don't think it would slow him down that much if it's the right kind of weight, but generally, I think being able to hold up and it was sort of a thing during the season of, he's healthy enough to play, but certainly there's the idea that he's banged up and bruised a little bit, especially I think it was kind of early on, it was more of a talking point, and then later in the season, it seemed like he sort of managed to get to a pretty healthy state. Not that it ever impacted his play too much. He was pretty great all year, obviously, but I think being able to take a few more hits and withstand that stuff with some extra mass would be probably beneficial. And I think a lot of the guys are talking about that. Like I think did we talk to Jamel Hardy? I think he said something similar, and I feel like even McEwen was still kind of working on that part of it too. It's just young guys kind of continuing to grow up a little bit.
Yeah, we'll see who's able to stay healthy in that wide receiver room, right? That's always the biggest thing. So there's a couple of new faces there too that actually had pretty good springs. So we'll see how that goes. Jump defensive
Oh,
side, Greg.
real quick though,
Yeah,
are,
yeah.
are you? I'm sure the people would want to know. Are you worried about Brandon High transferring? Is that a concern, or what do you think about the running back
Well,
group?
I was gonna save the transfer
Okay,
portal
sorry,
stuff
sorry.
for the end, but yes, there is some concern there as
Is
it
there?
with all the positions. So,
I
um,
just think I feel like at running back they're still pretty good. Like Robert Henry, obviously coming back, has the tools to be a workhorse. You can run him as many times as you need to, and I think we saw some good things from Bryson Donnell too, and we know some of those younger guys like a Frankie Arthur or is Will Henderson, is that the right name? Why am I
yep,
blanking?
yep,
The
yep.
from Comer. So yeah, I think I don't know. I feel like they're still pretty well stocked there.
Good
Not that
spot.
Brandon High's not a good player,
Yep.
but I think they'll be.
All right, Greg, let's talk defense. I would estimate this unit has maybe 50% of new contributors,
Oh,
whether that,
that's low.
yeah, 60,
Isn't it like
65.
90? Well,
Um,
okay. How many returners do they really have who are like starters? They have Owen Pee-wee essentially and Jamarius Lewis late in the
yep,
year. That's
right,
kind of it. Everybody else is going to be a new starter. It's guys who've been in the rotation, but yeah,
right. Brand
it's
new
going to be a
defensive
lot.
line, brand new linebackers, new safeties, new corners.
Yeah.
And I think they maybe took a little bit of time to get used to each other, but as the spring went on, they kind of showed they're really good. Some of the new transfers that have come in appear to be really, really solid additions. What were your big takeaways on the defense, Greg?
Yeah, I guess if we start with the defensive line and just work back, I mean, we can feel pretty good about John Jones. Showed some stuff last year. Jamie and Buxton in the middle seems like he's just going to continue to develop, and he can be that nose tackle type of presence.
Yep.
At least we have that type of body, and we'll see how productive he is and how many snaps he can play. And then Ty Leonard's a guy who maybe we would have seen even more from him last year if not for the injury and choosing to preserve the red shirt. And behind them, I think Kyan Roberts-Day
Roberts
seems like
Day. Yep.
a potentially big addition, impact transfer. Who knows if Johnny Bowens is going to be able to play and what he might contribute. And then you have guys like Chad Otutu and Damian Wimberly who are still in the mix as well. So I don't think it goes quite as deep as some of the units we've seen in the
Right.
last couple of years, but there's also no shame in that because that was a pretty special thing that they had going.
I
Uh,
do think that unit we may not see the end of additions there, right? If there's a spot where they're going to add into portal, and I think they might have announced someone a few days ago, right? So they're still looking there, but yeah, I mean, and then to continue on the edge rusher, I think is a area where everybody wants to kind of point at. You had the player of the year there the last 2 years, and
yeah.
now you got a whole group of another group of guys competing for that.
Yeah, I don't know if Vic Shaw I mean, he's clearly the starter at this point. I don't think there's any indication that he's not that guy, but I do think there's room for him to prove himself, let's say, that he can to play at that level, which is like, that's an incredibly high bar. I don't think it's fair to expect him to come in here and have double-digit sacks, but you just never know with the way he developed. He obviously got the opportunity in the bowl game, and he had at least a sack in that game. So, his 1 for 1 on getting a sack in his starts. So I guess maybe that's a promising sign, but it just depends how quickly he can develop into that role. It sounds like from talking to him that he's kind of ready to take it on or is not intimidated by it. And it seems like there's some confidence in him. I do think there's a little bit of question about behind him. Is Nana Nyanwu going to be healthy at any point that we can sort of see what he can do on the field? And then Cam Cooper moving into that role last year has already changed positions a couple times in his time at UTSA. And I think actually probably flashed more than I would have expected, especially as a pass rusher in that role, which even talking to him this spring, he sounds like he's not super comfortable with that part of it compared to some other parts of his game that he feels better about. So I just think it's gonna be interesting to see who they find behind Vic Shaw and what level Vic Shaw plays at, because that is a hugely pivotal position. Do you have high expectations for those guys?
Yeah, I think it's all going to boil down to Nana's health and if we see him on the field, ACL injuries the last two off seasons, right? So if not, I do think that's an area where they'll look for depth in the portal. And then on the inside linebacking room, that room has just been completely overhauled for the most
Yeah.
part, right? You had guys like Blackshire that were here last year, but I mean the TCU transfer is the one guy who sticks out to me this spring as holy smokes, this guy could play.
Yeah. Yeah, Shad Banks, I guess, just based on what he had done previously, was sort of a guy that I penciled into that spot just based on there being a need. And I did a depth chart for another publication that asked me to put this together. And I put Blackshire as a starter just because, I don't know, it seems like he's been in the
He's
mix the
here.
most. I
Yeah.
don't I don't know if based on what we saw last year that you feel great about that, but it's certainly possible that he takes a step forward and maybe, I mean, it felt like last year he stood out more for penalties and things like that than anything that he did production wise. He ended up with, a few tackles to his name, but, and then I think Ian Jackson's kind of in the same position where they transferred in together and Ian didn't show a ton here, but we'll see if he's got that in him. He's going to have more opportunity now. And I think Brandon Tucker, I forget, is he the East
Yep.
Texas A&M
Yep.
transfer?
Yep.
I mean, I
Yep.
feel like
He looked really good too.
we've heard some good things about him potentially. So I think that I don't know, maybe they'll be all right there. It's going to be hard to live up to what Jamal Ligon brought the last few years, and even Martavius French, just knowing that those guys were going to be as productive as they were. So it's a high bar to live up to, but I think they at least have some guys that they probably feel comfortable enough putting out there, or at least rotating.
Yeah. What's your overall big picture view on this brand new secondary, right? You mentioned Jamarius Lewis in the back. He played a little bit. We saw Davin Martin. Is he a safety now, I think? So
No, that's Milton. Milton they moved
Milton,
over
I'm
there.
sorry, Tyne Milton, right? Correct. So and then new contributors in the corner room, right?
Yeah.
So
So it's interesting because
brand
you
new
mentioned
group.
You mentioned when we were talking about defensive line, you said if they look to add somebody, it might be here. And then we talked linebackers, and you said it might be there. To me, corner is the number one where you have to get, if not one, like you might have to get three guys
Yeah.
because Pinnis left, right? He went to Michigan State, and I don't know exact. I mean, the fact that he went to Michigan State tells you he probably was in line for a pretty big role. But he was a guy that at least I had him kind of in the two deep. It's hard to know. They rotate. It did seem like weirdly, it seemed like I don't know if we're even allowed to talk about this, but like when they go first team against first team, we can't report it, but we can watch it. And we kind of get a sense of who's who. And
But then it's
it
not all the first team all the
Right.
way across the board.
The secondary felt like it was the most random guys. Like
Yeah.
the rest of the unit all kind of made sense, but secondary it felt like they were on a different timetable than the others. Like they were doing twos with the ones and ones with I didn't understand what was happening back there. So it could also be sort of a product of the personnel and some questions they have there, but it felt like total guesswork where at this point it looks like Zach Morris, is the guy that we've at least seen play some. He transferred in last year and it was fine. I don't think it was a standout role. And then Jacavian Rogers is on the depth chart, and we talked about him being so small and having to put on weight and what that would look like, and if he could ever fully develop into a productive college player. And Davin Martin's another guy that they've been kind of working to develop. So I think with the amount of people that they lost there, there's definitely a lot of need for somebody to step up and prove themselves. Or I envision that starters might not even be on the roster yet, or at least one of them. I think that's probably the number one place that they're going to look to add over the summer.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we could get into it right there, right? I would say that the Roadrunners survived the spring transfer portal window. If you look at what happened in the portal from December, right? So you have two windows that happen every year, and this is probably the most hits that UTSA has taken since the transfer portal was invented. They do keep replenishing, so the transfer portal takes away and it also gives you some guys. But from what I was told, what I understand, there were more than a few close calls down to that midnight deadline the night before the window closed, and UTSA was able to hang on to some of their key productive guys that were almost out the door. So that's how I would paraphrase it. Obviously, it's never great to lose a potential starting cornerback, a potential starting oh place kicker. I guess you have two subtractions in the running back room dating back to the end of last year. Defensive line with uh, our linebacker with Martavius French, defensive line with Ronald Triplett. So all of those guys maybe weren't going to come back because we didn't know the JUCO ruling at some point. But if they would have wanted to, I think UTSA would have accepted them back and planned on having them. It's always the bird in the hand. Is it better than the one over there, whatever. So um, what are your big picture thoughts on NIL and how it's impacting schools like UTSA at this point in the calendar?
So I think when we have the conversation going forward about how NIL has impacted UTSA and the guys they've lost, we're going to talk about Cam Alexander and Zachary Franklin and Trey Moore. And from this year, we can talk about Ronald Triplett, but he wasn't at that level. I don't even know how many games he started here. And if it's the week that the transfer portal closes in the spring and we're talking about the kicker, we're doing all right. You know what I mean? Like that's not the end of the world. Obviously,
Jamoy Robinson, player of the year in there.
but that's what I'm saying is I think that those JUCO guys, I don't think it's fair to count them in that same group because they've gone through the whole process of saying this is the end of my time here. And so at that point, you already have kind of a fresh start where it almost makes more sense to transfer because you've like wrapped up your whole time at UTSA. And I don't even know if that includes academically. I'm sure that's secondary for a lot of these guys, but I guess what I'm saying is you've done your senior day and you've said goodbye to everybody and you knew you were moving on. And so to come back would almost be weirder than to transfer somewhere. So in the grand scheme, it is kind of a big loss, but I'm not going to hold that against them in the ledger of like how NIL has hurt UTSA, if that makes sense. I think that's probably kind of a weird sort of different scenario. So in terms of the impact of the guys that, the players that it would have really hurt to lose, obviously would be like Owen and Devin McEwen and David Amador and Robert Henry. And I'm sure all those guys had offers of one size or another. And to keep all those guys, I think says you're doing all right. So I don't know. We've talked about like Owen's connection to Jeff and the family, and we talked about Devin McEwen's connection to Jeff and the family, and I think Amador probably not being super heavily recruited might feel some loyalty there. Robert Henry's honestly kind of a surprising one. I wouldn't have thought that a guy of kind of what he'd shown, and like I just talked about, like with the JUCO waiver, you don't expect to be back, and it's natural to take a fresh start somewhere else if you want it. So that's like a huge bonus to me. And then so yeah, I would say that really that it hasn't hurt them as much. Like I'm sure if you just look at the sheer number of guys in the portal and you think about how many came off UTSA's roster, it's way lower than the average. And if you just look at the most important guys, they didn't lose a lot of those, which is what a lot of their peers are probably dealing with. Like, even Tulane, like they picked to win the league, they lost their quarterback, right? So he's one of the ended up being one of the highest paid guys in the portal cycle, depending on what you believe. So I think it's really hard to protect your top talent at this in this conference, regardless of what school you are. So I think that UTSA was able to do that. They probably fared better from the portal than a lot of guys. They didn't. Am I maybe not thinking of any? There was no super high impact additions, I don't think. I mean, we talked about like Shad Banks and Roberts Day, and we'll see them play a lot, but there was nobody that coming into the spring that I was like, I gotta see what this guy can do, which I feel like I've had that vibe the last couple of years. I don't know. Is there somebody I'm not thinking of?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Just either the four-star kid from TCU or guys we hadn't seen. I mean, I whenever Johnny Bowens is back, he would be
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
one of those guys. But I do think too, there's an argument. I see both sides of the argument, right? Because for me, you could just look at the edge rusher position, and even if they were able to get Jamori Robinson back, if they could have got him back anyway, I mean, you just want him for the depth. You could see that room is one of the rooms they needed in. And same thing with Brandon High, right? You don't know if like the from what I understand, the conversations with guys like Robert Henry and Devin McEwen, I mean, there's no metric for roster retention, right? And maybe there should be because like we don't know what those guys, if they were offered, what they were offered, but obviously those are the type of guys that are getting targeted off these rosters. So the assumption is there's something there. From what I heard, UTSA did a good job keeping those guys. So there's something there on that side of it where, okay, you're losing guys, but you're also being able to hold on to most of your own guys. And to your point, they've done a really good job there.
Well, and even like you think about Brandon High, and I don't know the exact timeline and how this all came together, but he might still be here if Robert Henry wasn't coming back, right? So then you see these teams like I think back to when UTSA played Coastal Carolina in the bowl, and it's like, well, there's like five running backs in the portal or what like that. At that point, you know that they would have kept a bunch of those guys, or that those guys aren't leaving because of opportunity. Because any one of them could have said, "Everybody else is leaving. I'm probably pretty good if I stay here." Like at that point, you know there's something else going on, whether it's NIL or just something that they were unhappy with the program and their role in it. And so to have somebody like Brandon High leave, I don't think is as damning as if five running backs left. Do you know what I mean? Because like at that point, he might be just looking at the opportunity rather than what he's getting here from NIL or any other number of factors that play into it.
Well, UTSA continues to fight the good fight on that front. Good thing is, sounds like the house settlement is coming at some point.
Well, we got a roster limit issue that they're working through as we speak, but we'll see how that plays out.
And then we'll see how the school steps in and takes over. Play Max Sports, Play Five.
Playfly, yeah. What are they doing? What was it? It's innovative, creative solutions to your multi-pronged approach. Yeah, for sure. That's
I am
critical.
excited to see what that brings. I think that's a big opportunity for the school as a whole. So,
Did
no,
you have any thoughts? Did you have any thoughts on not doing the spring
that's what I was going to ask
game? I
you.
guess you were just about
No spring
to
game.
say it, but did you have
Kind of disappointing, right? I think from the fan perspective, I don't know that attendance was all that great in terms of, butts in the seats, but people kind of like to see a glimpse of the Roadrunners. It gives you a chance to watch your team on a Saturday, drink some drinks, have some fun. But sounded like to me it was a issue of not wanting to showcase some talent, maybe a budgetary issue as well, and then just kind of rolling with the changing wave of other schools. I think a lot of other schools decided not to do it, and that made the decision a little bit easier.
Yeah, so I know when I can't guess I wish I could remember when I had this conversation, but at some point they were set on doing it. It was like, hey, a lot of people are canceling their spring game. Are you still doing it? Yeah, we're still doing it. And then at some point along the way that changed. And there were times in recent years where I think the ballpark attendance at the Dome would have been like about 8,000 or something. Like they had a decent level of fan turnout and interest in that. And I am sure getting in the Dome is expensive, and I'm sure there are a lot of costs associated with this. But at a time when everyone is so focused on driving more revenue to now be able to share it with the players, and like they're increasing ticket prices and stuff, there must have been some way, even if you do it on campus, that you could turn this into some kind of fundraising event where you're either selling tickets for it or selling things adjacent to it, or you set up a merch stand and you try to sell some UTA. Like, I would think that there would have been a way to do some kind of spring
Show.
football-ish event, right? That could have potentially been a revenue driver. So it feels like a missed opportunity to not do anything. Um, but maybe they have a plan over the summer that would be kind of similar to that, and maybe that's why, doing two of those doesn't make as much sense. But just seems like, there's people looking for the spring game. Like we were writing stories weeks after the decision was made, and people are like, "Hey, when's the spring game?" Well, the part you missed is they're not doing one. So, people might not pay as much attention to that, but they still want to get involved in it. And I actually, I mean, it's not. We asked about how they set the spring schedule, and it was, well, we need extra time for strength and conditioning. And they talked about how they changed the warm up routine to try to limit injuries and stuff like that. And all that is very valid. But I don't think it would be pretty naive to think it's a coincidence that the spring game was scheduled for the day after the transfer portal closed, like
Right.
12 hours later. So, given that you had already sort of made that accommodation, I think it might have been a little bit overkill to not do the game at all. Like they were already that was not like an actionable thing unless you're really, and I wouldn't put this past anybody, but unless you're really worried that what they show on the day after the portal closes will get written down somewhere and then they'll get poached in December. I mean, I guess you can be worried about that if you want to, but I get what I'm saying is I feel like that might have been. I think it was probably a little bit. I don't know how much they would have made it off of, but it just feels like a missed opportunity, or maybe a little bit too conservative to not do something.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I do think the financial component of the cost of getting into the Alamo Dome is something
Yeah. That,
uh,
but like,
bigger.
I don't know, like, what does it cost to do it? They did it at Ferris. Like, what does that cost? Or like, if you do it at the practice field, didn't they do it there one year and they rolled out some bleachers?
I
There was some
do
level
it.
of,
Yeah.
yeah, right. There was so like, it's not impossible. I guess, well, that was pre-race facility, right? I don't know if that makes more sense than doing it at the race. I
To
don't know.
the to their credit, we did see several times this spring where it looked like they had several business groups involved. I think they were selling season tickets and trying to do stuff. So they were doing some stuff. Like
Oh, sure, sure.
they didn't like promote it and it wasn't like general knowledge, but there were people there, you know, I would say once a week doing things. So
Yeah, you're just hoping that you make a profit off the event itself because I think anybody who would go is probably already a season ticket holder. But if you could make some extra money that day,
yeah.
but again, it's like what is the cost to do it is something I don't know. So maybe they ran the numbers and it just wasn't going to be worth it. But it feels like there could have been something.
I don't know if this is too early. Maybe it is, but this looks like it's going to be another good team, Greg. I think I saw a metric where UTSA was predicted to be fourth. I kind of bounced that off some people inside the program, and they're like, let's see how the transfer window goes." And it's
Yeah.
close now. UTSA's got who they got. They're going to bring in a handful of other guys to maybe contribute in the offseason, but they got what they got, and they look like they're going to be at least in the top four, I would say, in this conference.
Yeah, I think you look at the top of the league, and I've seen some projections where they're like fifth or sixth. I think you're looking at your Memphis and your Tulane and your Army and Navy the way that they played last year, and then some people, I guess, opinions are divided on whether USF is going to make this big jump or whatever. But so those are the teams that I think you're probably most worried about, unless I'm blanking on somebody right now. But um, compared to the expectations for last year, I think that the bar will be a little bit lower, but it'll depend on how they kind of, last year we let them tell us that the expectations were really high last year. A lot of times you can blame the media for that and then say, well, we didn't live up to expectations that you guys set for us, but they were the ones kind of driving the playoff discussion and setting the expectation that they'd be at the top of the league. So we'll see what kind of narrative they want to sort of push this year or how they approach that differently as a result of kind of that letdown. But I do think that they should be in the mix near the top of the league again.
One thing you can't blame the media on, I'm going on the record right now, is all of those timeouts. We do not
True.
want those media timeouts. They are not our friends.
They
So,
call them media timeouts, but not our choice.
not our media. Greg, I think that'll wrap it up. Anything else you want to hit on? The basketball, women's basketball has the Karen Aston. They were able to keep her from leaving.
Yeah.
Sounded like she was in contention for at least two jobs, maybe one, two jobs.
Yeah, it depends what you believe out there in the rumor mill, but I think what was it, Arkansas and Houston? Is that right?
Yep.
Which is funny. It's the same guys we were talking about for football. What a coincidence. But
What?
anyway,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's a big deal, obviously. And we saw Sydney Love's in the portal, and
Yeah.
Jordan Jenkins is gone, and so she's got some work to do. But you can't argue with the success that they had last year, and she proved she could build it up pretty quickly. So why couldn't she just sort of restock and build it again?
Men's basketball looks like they're going to have two new assistants following some staff changes there. It sounds
And like 13 new players, but yeah.
yes, yes, very delayed on that one.
I don't know anybody. I got nothing on that. We're going to have to see how it comes together. But that's sort of the nature of it now. When you're a team that doesn't win a lot and you have a new staff, you're going to have turnover every year. So it just takes one group to kind of hit, and then I think you can start to find some stability.
One thing I will say for basketball, all it takes is one really talented player to swing this thing
That's
around.
true. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a lot less roster numbers. So we'll see how that goes. Four-star Austin Nunez coming back to San Antonio. So that'll be interesting to see how that works out. And UTSA's baseball team is pretty good this year, Greg. 34 wins as of that Texas State win last night. And they are, man, they are rolling.
Yeah, I got to move that up the list of priorities for me. I think they got a couple weeks left in the season, and then there'll be some postseason stuff. But you'll see me out there before too long trying to get some feature stories together or whatever, just on the level of success that they've had, which I guess it shouldn't be too surprising given that they were on a pretty good trajectory, but it felt like maybe last year the momentum wasn't exactly the same as the year before, where they were kind of, if I'm remembering this right, because the year before was when they were kind of right on the cusp for a potential tournament bid and didn't get it. And then last year it didn't feel like that was even a possibility. So to sort of, not to say that they ever like dropped off, they were still at a higher level and on a good trajectory overall, but to be at the level they're at now, I think is a whole different conversation.
There are a couple of things that are surprising to me is they're really good hitting and scoring team, right? I don't think that's something they've been as good as in the past. And will that be able to carry them in postseason play, which is typically more pitching based? So
Sure, yeah.
see how that goes. And then the other kind of twist to all this is the RPI and the potential for a regional host. And we all know the facility conversation around baseball and what that is, and if that's even if there's even an opportunity to do something at the Missions ballpark, which is the AA team here in San Antonio, AAA team here in San Antonio.
There's 16 regional sites, right?
So how all that comes together, maybe it's too soon. We'll see. I think in recent years, UTSA has had good seasons and hasn't had such great endings to where, they stay in that consideration. But considering how hot they've been, I would expect them to. I mean, it's not they 34 wins is a lot of wins, and for them still to have 2 weeks of play left, it's significant for me.
I lagged there for a second because I was Googling it, but I think there's 16 regional sites, right? That's a pretty high bar to expect that they could be in the mix for that sort of thing. But I guess who knows?
Right, right. So we'll track all that down. I think, Greg, unless you got anything else, I think that'll wrap it up.
No, this was good. I'm glad we did this. The people, they like to see this stuff every once in a while, and this holds us over until, gosh, I don't know when the next one will be, but we'll be talking
July,
at that point, yeah.
July for AAC football.
Oh, sure. Wait, do we know what day that is? We could probably
Yeah,
have this conversation off camera, but I
10.
wish I knew. Oh,
Yeah.
we're not sure yet? Okay.
Well, until then, that'll wrap it up. I'm JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports. Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. Thanks for watching, everyone.